The boarding school and the nanny. We all know that most fake profiles almost always say they have a child. Most of the time, that child is away at boarding school or with a nanny. We are often asked, why boarding school? Well, just like the scammer will tell you he is working abroad on an oil rig or a medical contract far away in a different country, having a child in a boarding school is an excuse for the child to be away and out of the country as well. This also provides an opportunity for the scammer to ask you to email the child, which will always be the scammer responding to the emails and pretending to be the so-called child. It gives them an excuse for it to be the child's birthday, and if the child is in boarding school, they'll often ask you to buy a gift card for this so-called child, as they are away at school and can't meet you in person. The same way the person you are talking to is away on contract and out of the country. What is unusual, at least in the United States, is most kids do not go to boarding schools. In fact, it's hardly ever talked about. Scammers, however, use this often, and they do so because it indicates that the person's wealthy. After all, boarding schools are expensive, and most Americans can't afford to send their kids to boarding school, and in telling you their child is in boarding school, it gives their target victim the idea that they're chatting to a person who is financially stable, if not wealthy. So when it comes time to ask you for money, and they say they'll pay you back, you'll think this person has money, so they'll be able to pay me back. After all, the child's in boarding school. The reality is, even if the person you are chatting to has a child, it's highly unlikely they would be shipped away at a boarding school, especially if they're from the United States, and then claim the child is at some international boarding school in a European country. See that as a huge red flag, especially if you're chatting to someone you've just met online who is showing an interest in you. The boarding school story has been around for decades, and it'll continue to be around. In that same respect, many romance scammers claim their child is with a nanny or in a nanny school, especially if they claim that they're in the military. This is another red flag and something to pay attention to when you are chatting online to someone new. The child being with a nanny while the parent is on some sort of international work contract or deployed to some war-torn country is also unusual. But this story also gives the scammer the opportunity to ask you for gift cards for their child who will almost always have a birthday coming up. It also allows the romance scammer to have a crisis and ask you for money, and then they will typically ask you to wire or bank transfer the money to the so-called nanny, who in reality will be another victim who is unknowingly accepting money from another victim, or it'll be a money mule who works for the scammer. It all comes down to listening to the story, counting the red flags, and then blocking. Above all, do not send money or gift cards to anyone you've met online, especially if it's for a so-called child away at some international boarding school or with the ever-famous nanny. Always look at the red flags and stay safe.